there, welcome to the weekly recap from Ms. Powell's Social Studies class. We just wrapped up the week of October 4th through the 8th. We had a lot of interruptions this week. We had picture day, we had an early release, and also since some of you are unable to be in the classroom with us, I thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and start some weekly recap videos so you can see exactly where we are, what you may have missed, or what you need to catch up on. So this week we started Unit 3, Westward Expansion. So we're gonna hop over to Google Classroom and I'm gonna show you exactly where you can find all the materials that you need. All right, here we are in Google Classroom. If you go over to classwork, you're gonna see Unit 3, Westward Expansion. Let's talk for a few minutes about what you need to know. Okay, we started off after our reconstruction test. Many of you had an opportunity to play the Oregon Trail. It is not often that I'm like, hey, you know what we should do in class? Let's play a video game. Hardly ever happens. Happened this week though, didn't it? So hopefully you were able to take advantage of that and you learned about some of the challenges that settlers faced as they moved west. As we are going through our class discussions, okay, we have the Westward Expansion slide deck to help us. Okay, this is where I take all of our notes from. So when you are following along in your folders, in your guided notes, this is what we are going through. And it is there in Google Classroom, marked Westward Expansion slide deck. We started off talking about the painting American progress, what we see in the picture, what we don't see. I'll come back to that in just a little bit. We'll do a general recap for those of you that are just trying to get caught up, and then I'll dig a little bit deeper into the lessons for those of you that may have missed them. Okay, but our big questions that we are focusing on. Why do we explore? What is our relationship to nature? And what is our responsibility? Okay, before we were able to really dig too deep into that, we have to define our vocabulary words. Okay, so if you were to look at our guided notes, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 charts have to do with vocabulary. This is a very vocabulary heavy unit. And so make sure you are going back and going through the slides and looking at our vocabulary and that you are filling it in the guided notes, okay? Speaking of guided notes, let's take a look at those right now. There we go. Woo. Okay, our Unit 3 guided notes. This is what is in your folder that we pass out at the beginning of every class. And I say, okay, look at your notes, turn to page 4, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, this is what we are working out of. So if you have that folder, if you're coming to class every day and you're filling that in, you do not need to worry about the guided notes that are in Google Classroom. If, however, you miss a day or a few days, or you need to go back, you've lost your folder, any amount of things can happen. It's in here for you to look up, okay? If you turn in those notes in your folder, because every week I do like a classwork grade and I check to make sure that you're caught up and where you need to be, you do not need to turn this in. You only need to turn this in if you are out of the classroom, if you are unable to use that folder, if you've lost that folder and you know that I'm about to take the grade and you're like, oh no, okay, submit it through here. Otherwise, I just take the grade from your folder. Excuse me. Okay. Like I said, we are super vocabulary heavy on this unit, so we came up with a Kahoot for you to practice that vocabulary. I've made the link available and active through October 18th. So if you click on that, you'll be able to practice the vocabulary words. October 18th is kind of an important date because that is going to be hopefully the unit test, unless something happens between now and then that we get behind. Day 2, you're going to be taking that test on Monday, October 18th. Day 1 is going to be Friday the 15th, but we will be posting some reviews and going along and covering everything that you need to know. Finally, to wrap up the end of the week, we looked at this Moving West travel guide. The Moving West travel guide is asking you to identify at least 2 characteristics of the land, so 2 physical features of the Great Plains. We talked about how that terrain was very harsh and difficult for the settlers moving west. Give me at least 2 examples of that harsh terrain. Then we also talked about how settlers were able to overcome the harshness of the terrain through adaptations and inventions. So you're going to give me examples of at least 2 adaptations. Okay, if you go back through your guided notes, there are plenty of examples of that. In fact, the last 2 charts that you fill out on page 4 and 5 talks almost exclusively about the adaptations and inventions. Include drawings of all 4 things. If you're doing this online, if you're going to use Google Slide, I have no problem with that. Just make sure that you include images for everything. Okay, so to recap, 2 sentences about physical characteristics of the Great Plains, 2 sentences about adaptations and how settlers were able to renew technology in order to survive on the plains, and then give me imagery of all 4 of those things. The rubric is right there for you to see what you need to do to be able to get 100 on the assignment, and what the criteria is for you to have to retry the assignment. Okay, so that in a nutshell is what we have been doing this week. All right, so now you have seen where everything is in Google Classroom. I'm gonna do a super quick review about what we talked about. The very first thing that we looked at was this painting, American Progress. Okay, American Progress, we're gonna find that in our Westward expansion slide deck. If we take a look on slide number 3, there we go. Okay, describe what is happening in this picture. One of my favorite things about teaching with this painting is that I've been doing it for years and I'm still discovering things, and every year a student points out something that I never ever noticed before. And I'll get to that in just a second. Describe what is happening in this picture. Okay, so box number 1 is pointing to this lady in white, seems to be flying above the scene. Some of you pointed out she looks like an angel or a goddess. Some of you said she's knowledge, she's truth, she's justice. She could be all of these things, okay? But she is guiding the way west. You see she's carrying the telegraph line in her hands. She's got a book of some sort. And what somebody pointed out in one of my classes that I probably noticed, but I never put a lot of thought into it, is how everything behind her is lit, right? Everything behind her is much lighter, and everything in front of her is in darkness, okay? Which is why I was like, hey, maybe this is knowledge, bringing all of our technological wherewithal, all of our manifest destiny, right? Bringing that all west, because everything behind her, you see the train and the steam engine, but as it goes behind her, those tracks disappear. And in front of her, you see the wagons, you see technology that's not quite there yet. Behind her is a little more industrialized. In front of her, we see Native Americans that there was some debate whether they are battling the settlers that are moving west, if they're running from them, exactly what they're doing. At this point, we weren't entirely sure. But by the end of the week in our discussions, that became a lot clearer. So, American Progress, this westward expansion, manifest destiny, the idea that not only is it good to expand our territory, it is a God-given right. It's our destiny to do that. So a lot of Americans are moving west with the understanding that they are going to get land, that they are going to have opportunity that they don't have back east. But it's not without challenges and problems. If you watch the video in the slide deck, you see some of the physical attributes, why the terrain in the Great Plains is so harsh. It's harsh because it doesn't get a lot of rain. There's not a lot of trees. There's not a lot of biodiversity. We have prairie grass. That's about it. Lots of wind. So as people are moving west and they are settling these lands, they have to figure out how to adapt. They have to innovate and invent in order to survive. Okay, so some of the issues, there's not a lot of rain. The prairie grass forms these really tight, intertwined root systems. So it's hard to dig down beneath that in order to plant other crops like wheat. Okay, so they have to innovate and come up with the steel plow to dig underneath of that sod and get to soil that is more manageable and they can plant their crops. This is called dry farming. Okay, going back to the idea that the Great Plains are like this treeless wasteland, basically. Okay, as they are building their farms, as they are raising their cattle, they need to build fences, but they don't have the lumber, and lumber is very expensive to transport in. So they use barbed wire to make their fences. So we see all along these different innovations that are being used so that living in the Great Plains is more manageable. They're taking that sod, that top layer of soil, and they're making bricks out of it to build their homes, okay? Because it's not going anywhere. It's those roots are keeping all of that soil together. It's a little bit bendy, sure, a little bit flexible, but it was really good for building shelters. Okay, one of my favorite discussions that we had this week had to do with that lack of lumber. If you don't have wood and you don't have trees to burn for fire, for heating your house, for cooking, what are you using? Those of you that were with me heard the conversation that we had about, are you ready for this? Cow patties and bison chips. So a lot of you said, well, they'll burn the grass. Well, grass burns, but it doesn't burn for very long. But who eats the grass on the plains? The cows and the bison. What do you do after you eat? So they were burning that. They were burning cow poop and bison poop. It's kind of crazy, kind of gross. I'm not so sure that I could have survived for very long doing that. But again, when it's all you have, right, you adapt and you find a way to survive. So for a while, on the plains, they were surviving with cow patties and bison chips. But later, we see the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, which is a railroad line connecting East Coast and West Coast. So yay! Now we are shipping people, we are shipping products and goods at a much quicker rate. And as a result, you see, don't come too close because then you'll mess up my face, but you can come a little bit. She's right here. So everyone, this is Abigail. Say hi.
Hi.
Okay, go away now.
Okay.
I love you. As a result, Transcontinental Railroad, East Coast, West Coast connected. It's easier to transport goods. Now we can bring in that lumber. It's still probably expensive, but at least we have access to it. We're going to see tremendous growth in boom towns, and cities even start to develop in the Great Plains as a result of the transportation. By the time the Transcontinental Railroad is finished, we see a much higher rate of people coming west. Okay, and this is where it gets into the displacement of the indigenous cultures. One of our learning intentions is to look at how westward expansion impacts the Native Americans. And it's definitely a negative impact on these groups. Okay, so as people are moving west, the Native Americans have a couple options. Okay, one is they can assimilate. They can decide to take on some of the culture that is moving west, give up their tradition, give up their culture, and accept the culture of the settlers, which means they're not wearing their tribal clothing. They are wearing clothes that the settlers have. They are hoping to stay on their land and not have to be relocated to reservations. But there's a cost, right? You're giving up your whole culture in order to do that. Okay? Then there are some other groups, and within these groups there are even traditionally peaceful tribes that don't normally fight, that never really were known for battling and wars. However, when it came to being relocated and put onto reservations, they did fight back. And so we see a couple examples of that with the Battle of Little Bighorn. Okay, there's a video and some notes. You can go back and look at that on your slide deck. Basically, the takeaway is that General George Custer with the U.S. Army made a lot of tactical mistakes. He really underestimated the veracity, the number, and the ability of the American Indians that he took on. He had like 225 soldiers, and then he split them up, and they just were completely annihilated. But then we also see the massacre at Wounded Knee, in which many Native Americans were killed by the U.S. Army. Okay, so we see a lot of fighting back and forth, but the final outcome is still, to this day, the majority of American Indians were removed from their traditional sacred lands and sent to reservations. So I will let you look at the slide deck and get all of that information. Of course, if you have questions, comments, concerns, email me, let me know what's on your mind. I am happy to clarify. I know this was like a really fast discussion and conversation to have about westward expansion. Sorry, a little tickle in my throat there. But it's what I got. So I wanted you to at least get a little bit of the information and not just be having to go through that slide deck and not hear my voice or have any idea what you should be doing. But of course, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Other than that, westward expansion. Yay. So that's part one. I hope I will do these videos like maybe once a week and post them so that you can keep up with what we are talking about in class. Have a wonderful weekend.